next session, which is called Tools for ITADs. And Claire, I noticed we're missing your picture on the slides. So, but we have you live and in person. So Claire, folks, is from TCO. TCO is the long-standing Swedish company, worldwide company, really, that certifies products. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But they have some a pretty interesting, valuable tool on their website, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a second. We also have Frederick from Blanco. Frederick's the Vice President and General Manager of International at Blanco. He's also Director of the International Data Sanitization Consortium. That's easy for you to say, Frederick. But,
I always say IDSC.
but thanks for joining us from Sweden today, where it is a holiday. So I thank you for taking a little bit of your personal time for joining us today. And we have Rich Kenny from TechBuyer. TechBuyer is an R2 company based in the UK. And Rich, I was kind of really impressed, as I Googled you to read about some of the publications you've done. You really are what I would consider an ITAD intellectual. So really kind of honored to have you there. We talked in the last session about about certifications, ITAD certifications. Certifications and regulations around the world are driving new tools into our industry. The new tools are making it better, easier for us to offer more services to our customers. More services equals money. So ITAD tools is, I think, an important part of the ecosystem. And although the session is called ITAD tools, you don't necessarily need to be a certified ITAD to use these tools. IT resellers, these are tools that really IT resellers can use, as well as ITADs. So with that, let me just turn it over. Who's starting, Frederick?
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, Joe. And talking about tools for the ITAD, we concluded in our pre-session that we want to focus on two different things that are absolutely critical for the ITAD today. First one being security, second one being able to position oneself within the whole sustainability movement, how to be able to articulate the value add and the strategy that one brings to the table as a professional ITAD today, and helping the end customer with their sustainability equation. You'll hear more from both Claire and Rich during additional sessions later on today as well. So you can see this as a little bit of an introduction, and then there will be follow-ups later in the program. But to kick it off, myself, besides what Joe has mentioned already, I've had the opportunity to be in this industry for almost 25 years, and I have seen the change over time. It is amazing what the industry has gone through and developed into. And I think the general conclusions from the three of us is that today we can proudly say that it is a strategic component in the IT landscape. But we'll come back to that. Claire, over to you for a few more introductory words about what you do, so people understand your views in more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Frederick, and hi, everybody. Claire Hobby from TCO Certified. We're a sustainability certification for IT products. And typically end user organizations plug our certification into their procurement specs. So our work in developing criteria and putting verification systems in place is definitely more upstream. We work daily with the big IT brands, but a really big driver for us to talk about here is the importance of procurement and the power of that voice in impacting, the ITAD space as well. And this is somewhat of a new area for us to explore as well, looking at lifetime extension, which we believe is so critically important for reducing those lifetime emissions. So thanks, Frederick.
Excellent. And I think we all understand the value of being able to influence procurement in the right way. So we're going to look forward to your comments, Claire. And then the intellectual of the ITAD industry, Rich, a little bit more about your background.
Hey everyone, my name is Rich Kenny. I'm Group Sustainability and Research Director at TechBuyer and Managing Director at one of our sister companies, Interact, which specialise in energy efficiency for the data centre sector. I also lecture in environmental engineering at London South Bank University, particularly around circular economy and circular engineering and manufacturing. My focus and our focus at TechBuyer is very much about the global circular market for enterprise IT equipment. So understanding the drivers that lead to successful ITAD. So what are the value statements customers are looking for? What are they trying to drive in their decision making? How do we validate their supply chain? And how do we solve legislative issues for global businesses through proper IT asset disposition? That's very much what we do.
Excellent. So let's kick it off. Before we can get into sustainability and circularity, we need to get over the hurdle of convincing the end customer about the security aspect, i.e. it is today, with today's technology and software available, you can achieve purge level security, you can live up to all the different compliance requirements, different standards, be compatible with the different certifications and audits that can be done. But still, even though that we in the industry knows this, Rich, what's your observations? Is security sometimes more than a hurdle?
Yeah, absolutely. We recently featured alongside yourselves in the Financial Times around this, on the drivers for businesses around not doing data sanitization, but actually shredding, and the amount of waste that is environmentally, cost-wise, and technologically. I think we'll put a link to that somewhere else if you want to look at that article. It's getting sort of mainstream attention that historically security was the reason not to do something, but now what we're seeing is security is an excuse for not to do it. So what we're seeing is that large financial institutions, pharmaceutical companies, healthcare organizations, they've got existing policies that don't reflect the current state of art. So what we see is that they would say, well, we can't do reuse or circular economy around our assets because it's not secure to reuse them. That might have been true 15, 20 years ago. And I'm still going to say might there, because I think technologically there probably was still solutions around there. But certainly in the last 10 years, in my experience, there's no excuse for not allowing circularity and reuse and remanufacture of assets from a security point of view. I think security is now seen as a convenient reason not to do what I would consider good business practice environmentally and economically. And it's specifically being led by liabilities. So the financial sector saying that we have unlimited liabilities around not shredding an asset versus recirculating it. It's only when the balance sheet reflects more than just money that security, I think, will cease to be the only blocker. I think when we start producing impacts around social and environmental impact of not reusing, that there'll be a stronger business case to say, you can't just say because security, there must be another reason, because I don't see security as a blocker, but many organizations, it's still their go-to excuse for not following best practice.
Totally agree with that. And I think we can also conclude that as an industry, we need to continue spreading the awareness and continue cooperating to make sure that the security message can be accepted by all larger players in the end customer ecosystem. And we saw from previous speakers, at DISA, for example, we've seen great movements in what kind of certifications that you can see based on advanced testing of security software to achieve data sanitization in their labs, where you today can actually get NIST purge proven from an outside testing body, instead of just having it as a self-proclaimed certification. So we're seeing great advancements also in documenting the security level that can be achieved by the different tools used in the industry. And that is an exciting development that I know a lot of people is seeing a lot of value connected to. Before inviting you, Claire, I'm also going to mention that we have also seen the spread of the new data sanitization guidelines from IEEE 2883 starting to get additional traction in the industry. We all know that NIST 800-88 have been sort of the go-to documents for how to achieve the right level of purge security. But the IEEE 2883 is another strong recommendation to really understand and start referring to, because there you have an industry initiative from the storage industry, etc., behind it to really communicate strongly around how to achieve the kind of security levels that big pharma, banks, governments, etc., want to achieve. So a lot of exciting things happening. Claire, talking to procurement, etc., what kind of security discussions do you run into?
Yeah, we run into this all the time, and for all the reasons both you, Frederick, and Rich have stated. This is one of many myths we need to work very hard to bust, I think, with the end user community. There's, as you mentioned, the financial community, particularly the healthcare providers. I'm based in North America. We know a lot of healthcare is private sector. It's dispersed. Lots of very sensitive data. We're seeing a lot of issues, particularly in the data center space around this. You know, we've got servers being destroyed, shredded after 1 year of use, and this is very much based in the healthcare vertical, if you like. Definitely, I mean, from our perspective, we require that every device that has our certification on it comes with free access to data sanitization software. So we definitely want to, communicate that to the end users. This is solid, it's trustworthy, it's built in, ready to be used. But it's definitely, this along with, the whole idea of refurbishment that we need to, we really need to educate the end users on this. And if we can show cases, if we can show stories, I think that's really going to be helpful.
I totally agree with that. And the good news that we can share in this session is that no matter the industry, you will find strong brands, strong global brands in any vertical today that actually have taken the leap of faith and have started processing equipment, releasing it into the ITAD industry for a proper circular life cycle instead of shredding and destroying. We know that there are many yet to follow, but we will always be able to share good stories about those who are going in the first wave for sure. So that's a good conclusion. So let's conclude then that we are able to get a security clearance. We have the audit trail, we can release the equipment. Talking about sustainability and circularity once you have the equipment can also be down to many different levels of detail and understanding. And Rich, how would you describe what you have seen sort of developing the circularity insights when it comes to the ITAD industry? On what level do we need to be today when we are positioning and talking about these aspects of the total value proposition?
Yeah, you've made a good point there on total value proposition. I think historically ITAD's been about them getting money back for equipment, and the whole pitch for ITAD was, your assets that you think you have to pay to get rid of could have residual value, so we can actually give you money to take things away. And that was always the strong position for ITADs, to say, your equipment's worth something, we'll buy it from you. That is still a small consideration, I think, but the key consideration now is understanding how we fit into a business's strategic objectives around environmental, social, and governance, so around ESG. So ESG risk and ESG risk management, ITAD can play a really strong role in de-risking their supply chain. So if they can, if us as ITADs can align to the strategic level objectives of a business, which in many cases has been led in the financial and healthcare sector, most of the ESG requirements are leaning heavily on finance first, because they tend to say if you can pressure the money, all the other businesses will fall in line, really. So a lot of the ESG leadership we're seeing come out of financial institutions, or at least certainly a lot of the legislation is going to be hitting them first, primarily around most of them having to have plans for net zero. As an ITAD, you fit into that, and the key is to be able to position the strength of the offering to those board level objectives. So you're no longer dealing with just an IT manager or a procurement person. You're dealing potentially as high as a chief sustainability officer, a CTO, a CIO, a CFO. You're dealing at board level initiatives now by providing a service that encourages circularity, reduces sunk carbon by doing product life extension. You're talking to a different audience now. You're talking to a much more educated and full scope aligned stakeholder in the business, which means you've got multiple routes into that business now that you probably didn't have before. But you're going to have to be able to talk the talk. You're going to have to understand the pain points. You're going to have to understand the levers that need pulling around circular economy, around the carbon economy, and even as a basic level, an understanding of material and social impact within these assets. So there is an element the ITAD industry needs to educate itself better on how they solve customer problems. And so education of this sector is crucial right now, because if we can educate the customers, we can win business.
Very well articulated, and it brings a new level of interaction for the ITAD industry, just as you say. And when we have that level of interaction with new stakeholders within the enterprise and government accounts, I know, Claire, you have a lot of thoughts around what are the actual relevant actions that we should be discussing, rather than maybe general high-level figures for scope 3 that might end up in some sort of report that doesn't drive action, but you definitely see a lot of conflict there.
Yeah, for sure. There is a real interest or a huge appetite for data. I read last night, the data question right now, it's a thirst that can't be quenched just yet. But back to this idea of, I'm really interested to hear that this idea of moving the ITAD conversation further up the value chain. Right. I think we've got a lot of perceptions to change with the end users. When we think of circular economy, it's really a product design issue in essence, in our world, right? So that's where we're very active. We are designing our criteria, everything down to the chemicals used in the plastic. We don't want to butt up against legislation against certain materials if we're aiming for extended life, right? We need to ensure that these products are designed to enable that circular use. But in that same cadence, we're telling the purchasers, you need to think about recovery, reuse, refurbishment in that pre-competitive phase. You need to be thinking about that before you even go to tender, before you have to have that dialogue with the ITADs, with the brands, with us, very, very early on. So I think moving this whole conversation further up the value chain helps them understand the risks better. They understand why the reductions in the supply chain is so important, and how to think in a more circular way that doesn't put them with a product on their desk that they then start thinking about how they deal with it at end of life.
So moving upstream, excellent advice, and a good example of moving upstream and getting into a very well articulated, thought through case. I know you, Rich, have a good story to share around the Royal Mint and what kind of detail we can actually take this conversation to. I think that would be interesting to share with the audience.
Yeah, no worries. So Royal Mint basically produces the currency in the UK, and they've started a gold reclamation from e-waste scheme, which makes sense when you think that they mint coins. And what they've created is from the ground up a circular system from receiving what we would consider e-waste, putting it through base metal recovery, so taking the gold and precious metals out of it, and also some other secondary metals. So most of the primary ones, so gold, silver, copper, elements of tantalum are what coming next, and some areas around zinc and neodymium as well from composites. At the point where they've removed the precious metals, that's where most reclamation would stop. And that's really where they just get started. So their next stage is that they shred up the fiberglass and the composites within the PCBs, and they use them and they send them downstream to concrete manufacturers who produce low carbon concrete. So what would normally have been shredded and waste material then becomes a base material for a low carbon concrete. That whole process is also powered by a process called pyrolysis, which is heat without burning. And that process allows them to generate a gas called bromide that they can turn into a crystal fuel source, bromide crystals. And they actually use the heat and waste generated from shredding and deconstructing the system boards to power their entire plant, both for the metal reclamation and the stamping of coins. So their waste from start to finish in the use of a PCB is 0.1%. You know, it's infinitesimally small, because they've looked at where waste is in every area of that hierarchy. So take the raw materials, the metals and stuff out of it. That's quite simple. It's effective and technical, but it's simple. The next stage is, what do you do with the bits that also have a value but you don't use? You find a relevant partner that can take those on and provide a ecologically valuable material from that, such as low carbon concrete. Then what do you do with the whole process of the actual power and heat generated to use the process? That can in itself become a secondary fuel source. So that sort of full life cycle thinking, destruction, is crucial for how we kind of flip this conversation. So that what would traditionally be scrap or historically landfill becomes almost fully reintegrated back in the value chain.
And basically, what we want to see is that for a very, very, very small percentage at the end of the process. But before getting to that stage, the critical challenge for the industry, all of us, is to make sure that we have the funnel well articulated. And I know, Claire, you like talking about the funnel and what we want to see as the different steps. So we have as little as possible going into that vital last step as well.
Yeah, for sure. And funnily enough, that last step is where a lot of our conversations with purchasers actually start, right? So, you know, there's a lot of assumptions out there saying, well, we recycle everything. That's great, right? Well, it's not bad, but you know, let's think about that hierarchy of you know, where are we generating the least emissions? Where are we, you know, and it's that longer use phase, and you can do that in various ways. But yeah, that's one of these kind of moving ourselves up the value chain conversations that's so important.
So we want to see as much reuse as possible, based on having the security clearance to achieve that. We want to make sure that we can have remarketing of refurbished equipment if it can't go straight into reuse. And then at the end, when we've gone through remanufacturing, refurbishing, and reuse, that's where we could see a well thought through recycling process.
Yeah.
Great. Claire, I know that you had a roundtable just a few weeks ago where you also saw a lot of different sort of reactions, responses that could be good to sort of just share to see where people are at.
Yeah. I think I know the one you're thinking of, Frederick. Let's assume. Yeah, no, just briefly, I participated in a roundtable with a number of 20 or so large end user organizations, and it was specifically around scope 3 emissions, so emissions that are occurring in the supply chain for various product categories, not IT. And we quickly realized that of those 20 people, there was about 20 different approaches to measuring those emissions, and very quickly it was kind of hands in the air thinking, okay, clearly no one has this down. There's no silver bullet here. And I think what the big takeaway there is that data doesn't lead to reductions necessarily, right? I think we can't wait for perfection on data. We've got to really hammer heavy on reducing these emissions. You know, whether we can manage them 100% or not, that's not the point here. We've got to really strategically move in on emissions reductions.
And if the industry works together, I'm sure that within a year, within 2 years, we will have additional tools for the ITAD industry where we can articulate and guide 20 people sitting around the round table where everyone has different experiences. We can guide them even more steadily towards de facto best practices and how they should be looking at things. Joe, over to you.
I'm humbled. I'm humbled just listening to you guys talk. Rich, you know, I feel a little bit better about the environment after listening to you. I mean, you know, the British Treasury is taking all those resources and putting them back into productive use. That's pretty cool. And Frederick, thank you for leading the discussion today. And really, this is going to sound funny, but thank you for not making this a Blanco sales pitch. I mean, we all know Blanco. We don't all know. You guys have done a great job, you know, over the last few years, listening to the customers, listening to the ITADs, providing tools like remote data wiping and non-fungible or reports on data erasure. I mean, you guys have been great at listening. But today wasn't that. It wasn't a Blanco sales pitch. I thank you for that. And Claire, I mean, we're just so proud to be a partner with TCO and to have you as part of the ecosystem. You guys, you humble me. I want to thank you for your time today, for your education, and your commitment to the environment and the industry. It means a lot.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you so much.
Folks, our next session is going to be about ESG. It's going to start in 60 seconds. So we're going to disappear. We'll be back in 60 seconds. Hang in there. And thank you, guys.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Rich. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks very much.
Thanks all.